Hi everyone, welcome back to the Global MedTech Regulatory Trends True Quality Summit series. If you've missed the previous session around QSMR harmonization or any sessions yesterday, you can watch the recordings on demand. We're excited to have you join us for this presentation, Mdsap Certification Success and Failures. The session will run for 35 minutes with 10 minutes allotted for questions. If any questions come up through the presentation, please ask in the chat on the right-hand side and we will get to as many as possible. Presenting today is Danny Kroo. Danny Kroo is a medical device regulatory affairs and quality management consultant based in Montreal, Canada, who specializes in helping startups and established medical device companies obtain and maintain certifications to 13485, Mdsap, and EU MDR, and meet regulatory requirements for Canada, USA, Australia, Brazil, and Japan. Danny is an affiliate member of the Biomedical Engineering Department at McGill University and is the creator and lecturer of the graduate course entitled Medical Device Regulatory Affairs and Quality Management. I will now pass over to Danny for his presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Ben, and good day, everyone, and welcome, everyone. It's a very exciting occasion for me to be able to share my knowledge about Mdsap, especially about successes and failures. And I'd like to speak a little bit about my experience with Mdsap audits. And based on that experience, I think I can pass on some tips that can be used to how to approach the audit and how to make sure that it becomes a success. So the agenda of today's presentation is a brief introduction to Mdsap. We'll talk a little bit about the Mdsap process with auditing organizations, common failures with Mdsap audits, and what I foresee as how to be successful with Mdsap audits. So Ben already introduced me, so I'll go through this very quickly. I'm the president of DocuSys Corporation, which is a consulting company based in Montreal. I assist organizations with quality management and regulatory affairs. I could help companies with their whole system or only part of system, which could be training or internal audits. I was a medical device lead assessor for a notified body, and I did create a course for regulatory affairs and quality management at McGill University. So let's just start with the basics. What is Mdsap? So Mdsap stands for the Medical Device Single Audit Program, and it's a regulatory audit program. So it's a little bit different than other audit programs because audit programs are accredited by bodies, by national bodies, but this was jointly developed by the regulators. So it's a regulatory audit. And this allows the medical device manufacturer to have a single quality management system audit to satisfy the requirements of all participating regulatory authorities. So if they used to have audits for Brazil or the USA or for Canada or for Japan or Australia, they can all be done at once. It doesn't mean that they will not be audited by those regulators, but it's just the opportunity for them to have all of it done at once. So the participating members are Australia through their Therapeutic Goods Administration, Brazil through their Anvisa, Health Canada, the MHLW and PMDA for Japan, and the FDA for the United States. So the requirements, the quality system requirements for each of these that will be covered within the audit, and it only applies if you sell or you want to sell into the country. So if you're not selling to Australia or Japan, then you don't have to include it into your system. So so these are all the regulatory requirements, which can be found on the internet, easily found. The ones that are the most popular are the QSR, the 21 CFR 820, and the other 807, 821, and also the Health Canada. And in fact, Health Canada is a little bit of a unique case because in the past, they had a program called CAMCAS, and the Mdsap basically replaced that program. And it is the only jurisdiction where it's mandatory for a company to get certified with Mdsap. So this is unique to Canada. So there are also official observers, and the role of the official observers is to communicate and to see what's happening, but they're not in the program. So the EU and the UK MHRA and the World Health Organization are official observers. There is some talk that one day maybe the UK would want to be part of the Mdsap, but I think that that's a long way off. And there are affiliate members who are looking at the process and maybe using it for, maybe in the future using it so that companies could be audited for their requirements using the Mdsap program. So they include Argentina, Israel, South Korea, and Singapore. So the objective of the Mdsap audit, and don't forget, this is coming from the regulators because they control this process, is to develop, manage, and oversee a single audit program that will allow a single regulatory audit to satisfy the needs of multiple regulatory jurisdictions. So larger companies used to be bombarded with audits. I mean, there were companies that had audits almost for the whole year because of every jurisdiction wanted to come in. So they had even an audit department. It also to promote greater alignment to regulatory approaches and technical requirements. You see sometimes the same requirements said in different words. So hopefully this will allow, companies to have one procedure, maybe to cover all the requirements, at least some of the requirements which are common, and to promote consistency, predictability, and transparency of regulatory programs. You could have auditors from different jurisdictions, different locations, so auditors in Europe and auditors in Asia and North America. And you really want to make sure that when you get an Mdsap certificate, it means the same if you've got it from, if you were in China or in Asia, or if it's the same questions were asked in North America or Europe. So there is a consistency that it probably is very, very well developed, and the way it's set up, it ensures that this consistency and predictability is uniform. Okay, so what are the benefits? So going through this, basically you have less audits, hopefully, and you'll have one audit where you cover several points, which for larger organizations is a big win for them. And in some cases, reduction of audit costs. In some cases, it's not a reduction because you have to pay a third party to come do the audit. And in some cases, it's fairly expensive. But for larger organizations, there is more of a benefit than for smaller organizations. For flexibility, so you have the choice to choose your auditing organization. So there are about 13 or so auditing organizations. Most of them are based in North America and Europe, and they have locations and auditors worldwide. So it allows you to choose who goes in. Obviously, they have to follow the same requirements, but if you choose an auditing organization that has auditors in your city, then obviously it may be less expensive and easier to deal with. And also in terms of language, even though the auditing language or the reports are done in English, there are times when, if you're in a jurisdiction where they speak a different language, there auditors that speak those different languages are maybe more welcome because they're able to better communicate with people who work in different departments. So again, the predictability of audit outcomes, we're talking about looking at the same questions, the same approach. Everybody's trained the same way, the same grading process. There's no gray area. This is something that is really important because traditionally, you know, we've heard stories of different areas of the world where there may be soft grading, or there may be looking at different, and basically this approach allows us to, as much as possible, to eliminate that, to reduce it at least. And it also shows a commitment to quality and compliance. It's an expense. It's not a cheap program. It costs money, and if you're doing it, you're really showing your commitment to the medical device world and showing your commitment to be monitored and audited for the regulatory and quality management requirements. So just to highlight a few of the distinctions between if you were going through an ISO 13485 audit and Mdsap audit. So when you're thinking about the customer, so when you're in 1345 audit, your customer is, you're the customer, because you know you decide who's going to be audited, who's going to be auditing you, and basically you know you follow the scheme, and basically you're the customer at the end of the day. Whereas Mdsap, it is the regulator that controls everything, and they are really the they have the biggest say, basically. And in terms of the output, you know, for Mdsap, there's a report and certificate, and for 1345, you get your certificate. And for qualifying the auditing organizations, it's a competent body, so it's another organization within usually a country or a jurisdiction. So different competent bodies exist in Europe and in other areas. And with Mdsap, it's primarily the regulators who got together. So it's the FDA, Health Canada, TGA, and Japanese and all that. And with regards to non-conformance grading for ISO 13485, it's very clear. It's very clear, major or minor. In Mdsap, it's graded a little bit based on risk and based on whether this has an impact to the product, whether it has an impact to the quality system, and whether it's a repeat occurrence. So it's a repeat occurrence, you'll get a higher grade. Obviously, you don't want to get a higher grade because higher grades lead to more, you know, there may be unannounced visits as a result, and there may be other consequences of having these nonconformities. So this slide, I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but I just want to give you an idea of what the slide is about. So in each of the jurisdictions, they use the Mdsap certificate for different purposes. So for Canada, it is the most critical because you cannot get a license, class 2, class 3, or class 4 license without getting an Mdsap certificate. For the other jurisdictions, it's usually used as part of the evidence, or in the case of the United States, it's substitute for routine inspection. If you have a good record with the FDA, it could be used for that. But so obviously companies that are involved with Canada, they have to go for Mdsap. The other countries, jurisdictions, you could theoretically not have to go through Mdsap and sell to the US or sell to Australia or sell to Brazil or Japan. So there are a lot of countries that have bypassed Canada, who they're not selling to Canada because Canada is a smaller market and they didn't want to go through this Mdsap process. But I'm not suggesting you do this. I'm just suggesting that this is one of the practices that has happened. And what has happened is that some distributors in Canada have gotten Mdsap in order to to be able to continue to sell the device that used to come from the OEM from another market who didn't want to go through this Mdsap process. So this just shows the flow of how things work. So regulatory authorities assess the auditing organizations, and it's a pretty thorough and rigid assessment. And then the auditing organizations, whoever you select, will audit the manufacturers. If there are any nonconformances or corrective actions, they have to be submitted to the auditing organization, who review them. In some cases, if there are grade 4 or grade 5 nonconformities, I think if there are 3, or they have, I believe, 5 days, if I'm not mistaken, to submit it to the regulatory authorities, so that the regulatory authorities are aware that there was a major issue. And after the reports are done, because there's usually quite a delay, in some cases it's too long, the reports are sent to the organization and also to the regulatory authorities. So regulatory authorities have access to all that information. So there's a 3-year audit cycle. You start off with a stage 1, and then you have surveillance audits, and then you repeat the cycle again. So it's a re-audit. And there could be special audits. So for example, the most common special audit that I hear is when people want to add, when companies want to add products. So it's a change of scope. And those are most common. And there could be more audits in terms of nonconformances or any specific issues, or if there's a critical supplier that needs to be audited. And there could be audits by regulatory authorities. I didn't see it yet, but at least in the beginning, it was more common. And as I mentioned before, if you get a grade 4 or grade 5 nonconformity, then you could be subject to an unannounced audit, which means they won't tell you when they come. It's not like they'll tell you, oh, we'll come in this month. No, they will show up at your door and they'll say they're there for an unannounced audit. So as mentioned before, maybe I didn't mention it, but I just want to make sure I mention it. So ISO 1345 is the basis of the audit. So usually they're checklists, and they refer to ISO 1345 plus the applicable jurisdiction or country-specific requirements. So the FDA has specific requirements for design control, for approval. That would be covered if you're selling to the United States. So it's well organized in a way that for each element or for each clause of the standard, all the country-specific requirements are listed so that the auditor and also the client will not forget about them. So if you have several sites, you would have several audit reports, and you have to audit the whole system to get to recommend certification. So that's at least the initial audit. And there's no sampling of design and manufacturing sites permitted in the Mdsap program. So all sites that are doing design or all sites that are doing manufacturing for products that are applicable to the Mdsap program have to be audited. And all regulatory authorities in the program get copies of submitted reports. So even if you don't include the US, FDA will know about your report. They may not review it, but they have access to it. So there's a process-based approach. It's different from the traditional checklist that style audit that normally is done. And it's very similar to the FDA QSIT process. The auditor basically uses risk to define how they're going to go forward and how they select their samples. So the thing that's important is that there is already, I believe there's 7 processes that are listed, 6 or 7. And basically you have to follow the sequence of those processes and the interrelationships and connections between them. So within the auditor's checklist, there's always linkages to go to different areas. So for example, if you're looking at incoming inspection and they're asking about what is the specification to where does where does your incoming inspection information come from? They may go to design to see, whoever established those requirements. So what does the auditing organization do? They basically will review your procedures. They'll map the process. They'll ask auditees about the process to determine if the responses are aligning with the procedure and if the process is effective in achieving desired results. It's a bit of a skill, and they have to, after a while they get better at it, but it's almost like you're being bombarded with questions and you have to come up with these answers quickly. Analyze process performance against targets, so looking at your KPIs, and evaluate the handling of process product nonconformities and effectiveness of resulting corrective and preventive actions. So that's really a key part. They really want to see that you're doing what you're supposed to do in terms of nonconformities, and that you're not shipping knowingly a non-conforming product, and that you're taking corrective action seriously. And they're a little bit tough in that area. So you really have to be very very vigilant and very detailed, and make sure that that process works well. So as I mentioned before, there's the audit sequence. So you have the 4 primary processes, which are management, measurement, analysis, improvement, design, development. And then you have the enabling process, which is purchasing, which could involve any of those processes. And then the 2 supporting processes, which are device marketing authorization and facility registration. And then the adverse events and advisory notice reporting. So here is showing a graphic, basically how the sequence is going. So they started management, they could go to device marketing authorization, facility registration. They could also go down to the MAI, measurement, analysis, improvement. And then they follow this basic sequence. And it's a well thought out sequence. And I think it's very, and then, in between you see risk management and purchasing. It's always being viewed. Okay, so basically I mentioned all these things. There are applicable regulatory requirements are there, and the tasks that are involved are all listed for the auditors. Okay, I'm not going to talk more about this, and I'm going to skip over the grading, because if you want, you can review this. Basically, as I mentioned before, the grading is based on if it's a product related nonconformity or if it's not, and basically looking at the impact. So it could be direct or indirect, and based on if it's a repeat or a first occurrence, then that could cause the score to be higher. And if there is an absence of procedure failure, you add 1, and if it leads to a non-conforming device on the market, you add 1 as well. Okay, so this is basically the crux of what I wanted to talk about, because that was basically a review. So what are the common failures that companies have? So some of them, although they take, I believe they take it seriously, some of them just look at it upon it as a regulatory audit, as a 1345 audit with additional regulatory requirements, but it's not. It's almost as if you have the regulator in your room and they're asking you questions. And the regulator go through things a little bit in more depth than what the auditor, than what you may be used to in ISO 1345 audit. And it's really important that you have to adjust your own internal audit process to better align with the process of Mdsap audit, so that your personnel are familiar and they would understand how to deal with these issues. One of the things that I've done is I'm involved with a lot of Mdsap audits as a client, and I have some friends who are auditors, and they told me that one of the things that they find as a failure is that the organization does not clarify the scope and the role of the organization depending on jurisdiction. I mean, it sounds like a very simple process, but everything starts from the scope. So, and it's important to get it right. For Canada, there's specific requirements for the scope, and there's always a discussion about it, especially for startups or for new organizations. Change control. So as part of this process, when you're going through the questions, or they're going through the questions, they will always ask the question, what changed? And they're going to ask, well, can I see that you've issued a change control, or have you determined what the impact of those changes are? And in a lot of companies, maybe their change control process is not well defined, and maybe it didn't have to be well defined in the past, but this process really stresses it out, and there are a lot of nonconformities issued for change control. Outsourcing and purchasing controls. So this is a ISO 13485 requirement, but basically the auditor expectation, and sometimes it looks a little bit unreasonable. So for example, let's say if you outsource your production process, the auditor says, you're the license holder, you have to have production records. Show me the production records for this and that. And sometimes it seems unreasonable to the company if they outsource it to have it, but the expectation is that you have to have it. And the same goes with the design. If somebody does the design for you, well, you should have the records. And if you don't have the records in a timely manner, then there could be issues. And it's something that occurs more times than I can count, because a lot of companies, there are a lot of companies that outsource things, and the controls are not always the best. And also, what happens during the years, obviously, the regulatory requirements evolve. So there are more new requirements. So there's more new requirements with electrical devices, or with biocompatibility, or with post-market surveillance. And it's really a difficult job, but companies have to keep up to date with that, and have to audit it, and have to make sure that everything is addressed. So those are some of the failures that I'd like to talk about. So in terms of success factors, we're talking about preparation. So first thing, preparing is everything. So you'd want to train your key staff and process owners on Mdsap requirements. It's not just the quality manager, regulatory manager. It's everybody who's going to talk to the auditor should be aware of what their topic is, and how to answer the questions, and just answer what is being asked, not more. And also making sure that all the regulatory requirements from each of the applicable jurisdictions is documented, because the auditors will always ask you, okay, show me the procedure for this, show me the procedure for this regulatory requirement. And you don't have a lot of time to look. You should have that available. And it makes your life much less stressful if you know where all these documents are. Perform a thorough audit covering all design, production, tax for the product selected. So you make sure that you're doing a thorough audit, because you want to make sure that you're tougher than the regulators. Sometimes it's difficult to do that, but it's a goal, because then your Mdsap audit will be easy. And you also want to guess maybe sometimes at what products will be candidates for selection. And it's based on risk, it's based on changes, based on other factors. So by knowing that, you could hone in on the device that will be selected, and usually you're right. Spend time auditing the previous CAPAs, obviously, because you don't want to have a higher score because of that. So this is something that I offer that some people find as value added. I do an internal audit for companies, at least startups and people who are starting off with Mdsap, so that we're simulating the sequence and the task questions, and that allows the auditees the chance to practice, to answer the questions, and understand where, how does this audit work, and how do they select audit trails. so as I mentioned before, with the different, with risk-based, it's a risk-based and looking at changes. Okay, I think I talked about this. Okay, so one of the things that I'd like to talk about is if you are organized and if you want to simulate the audit, you can create your own report card, and you would try to simulate by examining the past nonconformities, grade them using Mdsap. It's not a requirement, but this is just gives you an idea and gives everybody an idea in the organization of what it's about. You also would open CAPAs for gaps to make sure that that you could track the progress of these gaps, and make sure that you're ready when the audit comes. And also be prepared to address regulatory issues. You know, they don't take anything for granted, these auditors. They will ask many different questions. They'll ask you even for your license, and even though it's available for them. So they want to see that you're able to find it and to be able to, even your certificates. Okay. So one of the best practices that I see in companies is they employ a back room or a place where people can be trained so that they will be able to retrieve documents in a timely manner. You usually get the audit plan before the audit. Sometimes it's usually could be a few hours before that could happen, but at least you want to stage the documents and be ready to give the auditors everything. The worst thing that could happen to you is having an auditor waiting, and they get frustrated because they're being timed per section, and they're very stressed in terms of getting the audit done and getting the information. And if they don't get the audit done, the audit information in a timely manner, they may say, okay, I'm issuing a nonconformity. You're not able to accommodate me or get me the information. The key to this whole thing, and if there's one thing that I want to share with you, is to be able to use this resource called the Audit Approach document. It's a 226-page document that tells you every question that will be asked. And if you study it, and if your team studies it, and if you're prepared with that, usually there are no big issues. Or if there is an issue, then you can deal with it. But that is the biggest key, and that is something that the auditing organization don't always share with you. I don't see too many of them telling you about it, but the FDA has an excellent site, and they have Mdsap questions, FAQs, and everything. And on that site is the Audit Approach, and it's the key document. If we do have time, I'll go through it a little bit. The other thing that is important is don't argue with auditors. Just ask questions for them to better explain if they have any issues. Okay, so because we're getting close to the end, I'm just going to skip through some of just going to show you this Audit Approach. So this is what it looks like, and you can do a search on Google, and it's the latest version that I know of is Rev 7, or it's April 15, 2022. And usually what you do is when you get a schedule, it's sometimes cryptic to everybody. So what does this task mean? What are these tasks? So the way to go about it is to look at the Audit Approach. And basically the Audit Approach has a table of contents, and you look for Chapter 6, and it tell you what page it's on, and it lists all the questions. So here if you're looking at task 8, let's say we pick task 8 here, and we're looking at task 8, and this is what they have to assess. So in a way, your own internal auditors can use this to audit. And that's very important, because if not, there are things that could fall through the cracks. So you see, here's more of the information, and here's some interpretation. and the requirements of the different countries. It gives good references, and it tells you what to look at. So it tells you what to look at during the validation and all the different requirements. So just to summarize, planning is the key to success. Organizing your documents and records so that they're easily retrievable. Use the audit approach. It's a resource. It doesn't cost you anything. Your internal auditors should study it. Conduct a gap analysis. Ensure that any previous Mdsap nonconformities, if there were any, have been resolved, and that your regulatory requirements are documented. And if you ever have any questions, I'm welcome to answer any questions. There's no charge or obligation. I'm always there. I'm always want to be there to help. And if there is something that I could provide you as a service, I'll be glad to provide you with a quotation. So I guess I'm just about finished. So I guess I'll pass it on to Ben.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you so much for giving all of your insight when it comes to Mdsap. We do have a few questions that have come in from our attendees, and I will do my best to try and cover as many as we can, but we do want to make sure that Danny has a chance to answer these as well. So let's start with this one. So how has Health Canada's exclusive mandatory enforcement of Mdsap certification for manufacturers impacted medical device availability for Canadians?
It's impacted it quite significantly. For the large companies, it's not a problem because they're in all these markets and it's easy for them. But the competing devices that they're competing with these large manufacturers, because the medical device manufacturer field is, you have very large manufacturers and you have small manufacturers. So the ones that were selling from Europe to Canada that were small organizations and they had their notified body, and their notified body wasn't part of the Mdsap program, they said, why should I bother about Canada? It's 2 or 3% of my business. So it has done, there is an impact. Health Canada doesn't want to talk about it too much, but I see it happen. I see what's happened. It also is an opportunity for some companies that want to get into that space, as long as they have information. And that's something that I help some distributors, that they want to continue selling the device. There's ways to get into that.
Thank you. Slightly long one, so bear with me while I read it out. We are an industrial design firm where we develop clients' medical devices from idea through to manufacturing. We do not own the device licenses, but our clients do. However, our 13485 QMS was certified earlier this year, but not under Mdsap, just regular. Would Mdsap ever apply to our situation? If our client will sell their device in Canada, they must undergo a 13485 Mdsap themselves, correct?
That's correct. So the company that's just providing design services does not have to be Mdsap, and because you don't have any licenses, you're not going through any regulatory involvement with Health Canada. So there's no requirement. As long as you have an 1345, which will help out a lot. But the company that is the manufacturer that has to provide the services that will get the license will be asked questions about the Health Canada requirements while they're being audited. So they may refer to your records.
Another one. So for countries enrolled in Mdsap, will their existing regulations not apply, or will they apply along with Mdsap?
Well, I believe everything applies. When there is a regulatory requirement, you cannot delete it. So for example, for the 21 CFR Part 11 for electronic records in the US, it's not usually asked during the Mdsap audit, but it's certainly a requirement. So the FDA could at any time ask you, where is this, or how do you conform? So it doesn't say that it's just covering this program. It doesn't mean that you're covering all of the requirements.
Another one. So Canada will only accept Mdsap and not ISO 13485. However, EU is not part of the regulatory bodies. So if you are selling software as a medical device globally, what is the best solution?
Well, do you want to sell it? What is the goal? Is it to sell to Canada? Or is it, if the goal is to sell to Canada, then you need Mdsap. If the goal is to sell not to Canada, then you can go about the different regulatory authorities. So you would deal with the FDA for this SAMD. You would deal with the different jurisdictions and with the CE marking or the MDR, EU MDR for Europe. So if you do not need to go to Canada, I find it very hard for me to say this because I'm Canadian. You don't have to go through the Mdsap process unless it's a market that you want to address.
Getting through these so I can keep going. I understand that BSI does Mdsap audits. They're not a regulator, so how does that work?
Okay, I didn't hear the last part. I recognize that BSI does Mdsap audits.
They're not regulators, so how does that work?
So the way it works is they've been trained by the regulators. And they have also been assessed by the regulators to ensure that they're following the process. So they have to have procedures, they have to have training. Every auditor has to have training. There's oversight all the time. They oversight on all the reports. They go with the auditors to the sites to see what they're doing, and then they approve them based on their program. So it's a quite rigorous program to do oversight for BSI or for any other auditing organization.
Okay, I think we've probably got time for maybe one or two more. If a medical device company, in this case the design authority, has several manufacturing sites within the same company, do all of the sites have to undergo an Mdsap audit for the company to achieve an Mdsap certification?
So if those devices are part of the scope, there is no sampling. So if they do the manufacturing, they have to be part of it. If they do the design, they have to be part of it. If they are, just a warehouse, they may not need to be part of it. It's something that you have to discuss with your auditing organization. But I believe one of the slides said that there's no sampling for design and manufacturing sites.
Thank you very much. So is Mdsap certification a TGA requirement when a device isn't CE marked and the legal manufacturer doesn't have an MDR certificate?
It's not an absolute requirement to get into Australia. I think you can go directly to the TGA, but it is one of the ways to use to go through to Australia. So you can do it through the CE marking, and you could do it through Mdsap. I'm not an expert on Australia, but I believe you can go directly to TGA. If you are located in Australia, if you're not located in Australia, you have to get a sponsor and then determine what the method of doing it is. The most common method is through CE marking, and the second may be Mdsap, but I'm not 100% sure what are the other options. So I don't want to tell you either way, but I believe there are other options.
So we've only got two left, so we should be able to cram those in. Can contract manufacturers supply products to Canada under their private labeller's Mdsap certificate?
So contract manufacturers, so private label Mdsap, I'm not really sure I understand what that means.
So if, for example, if a legal manufacturer who owns the device design and etc. has an Mdsap certificate, but they're contracting it out to a manufacturer, are they able to supply those products to Canada under that legal manufacturer's certificate?
Yes. So as long as the legal manufacturer certificate and the labeling correspond, if it's done in a different jurisdiction, like there are some companies in Canada that have product that's being sold in the US, and it's being it's being manufactured at a contract manufacturer in the US. So that product never makes it into Canada. It's everything is done in the US. All the records are transferred back and forth and the release is done. But besides that, I think it's a very common way that a lot of OEMs are handling it.
Right. Well, thank you so much for providing answers to all of those questions, Danny. I'm sure our attendees will have taken a lot of information from what you've provided today. And I want to say personally, thank you as well for answering all those. I will say we do have a few minutes left if anyone has anything remaining that they want to ask Danny. If not, I will leave that for a moment and then. All right, so well, with that then, we are at time. So thank you for joining us. The next session will be starting shortly and we'll be hearing from Bryant Foster about the Global Guide to the Human Factors and Usability Engineering Regulations. So please join us at the top of the hour for when that's set.
Okay, thank you very much.